Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. The Supreme Court, the highest judicial body in the United States, may be the most serious and certainly most solemn place in Washington, and possibly the most important. That's why the selection of the next justice is so important. My guest, Simon Heller, is a student of the federal courts. Before coming to New York, he was the legal director of the Alliance for Justice, the national organization that works intently to improve the country's justice system. Hello.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for coming. I remember when I was in a college class, we went to the Supreme Court, and I remember that there was a court officer, an attendant, who tapped someone on the shoulder and said, "Don't lean back." Is that really possible?
Oh, yes, that's quite possible. The Supreme Court is a very formal place, and people are required to sit still during arguments, not speak. It's a stark contrast to many courts around the country where you hear chit-chat in the courtroom as court business goes on. The Supreme Court is a very decorous place where people really follow rules. I think in some ways it should be. I think the proceedings in front of the Supreme Court are really of national importance in two ways, to the nation as a whole, but also to almost every person who lives in the United States. And it really needs the undivided attention of the people who are watching what's going on, particularly because the proceedings are not televised.
Right, we know.
So that the people who are sitting there in that courtroom, I think, really need to be able to hear everything that's going on and be really able to observe.
But there are people now talking in the selection process that we really need someone who understands people, right? And not being distant from it. And this whole mystique makes it even more. So that's an important factor that we should...
Absolutely. I mean, we can hope for that in the future on the Supreme Court. The current Supreme Court is composed entirely of people who previously served as judges. Many of them sort of developed their professional careers within the United States Justice Department. These are institutions that are very removed from the day-to-day lives of people. And so to bring that perspective to the court, someone like Earl Warren, who had been a political figure before coming to the Supreme Court, might make a big change on that court and make it more friendly to the daily lives of American people.
I read someplace that Nan Aaron, who is the director or president of the Alliance, said that focus groups have shown us that few people really understand, the whole court system, the federal court system, and the Supreme Court system.
It's really true. Of course, it may also be true about who's the vice president.
Right.
But it is a big gap in our society, in our culture, because the court system, particularly the Supreme Court and the other federal courts, make decisions every day that have a direct impact on our lives. Are we going to have unemployment benefits? If we're wrongly terminated from our job, are we going to have any recourse for that? Are insurance companies permitted to end our health insurance arbitrarily? These sorts of issues are decided by the federal courts all the time, and by the Supreme Court from time to time, in addition to the really big, controversial social questions like freedom of speech and religion and abortion that sometimes dominate the news.
Well, we can just, think about the eminent domain, take your property, right? Lilly Ledbetter about getting paid. But they made an incredible decision on that, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Lilly Ledbetter decision, which has been subsequently changed by congressional action and President Obama, is really an example of how the court can shape the sorts of basic economic and social policies that really determine...
That reverse them, basically.
And reverse and change them for the worse in that case.
The Lilly Ledbetter case was equal pay for equal jobs, right?
That's basically right. And she discovered that she had been paid less than her male co-workers for many years. And
they said it was too late.
This was too late, even though she didn't discover it until quite late. So So it's really an example of
So
what the
it's
court
a
can
smack
do.
at the women, right? At the women's movement, who always has made such a big issue, equal pay for equal work.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it really is.
It is.
And
It's
there-
interesting to think of it that way.
the recent decision by the Supreme Court that gave corporations much greater leeway to spend money to influence the political arena is another example, overturning decades and decades, probably 100 years of precedent, and suddenly will unleash the billions and billions of dollars that corporations have to spend to influence the outcome of our political world.
So here we have this elite, mystical kind of organization. And in order to get there, you have to go through the crassest political process, almost.
Crass in some ways, but very selective in another way.
Yeah.
It does require, today, it seems, a certain kind of background. Most of the people who have been under consideration for appointment to the Supreme Court are themselves already federal judges, may have served for 10, 15 years on another federal court. So they've already gone through one.
Been vetted for that.
They've
yeah.
been vetted, and they've gone through one
Yes, yeah.
process in which they've had to make sure that they have support that's relatively
Right.
broad.
And established a long record, so it's
That's
easy
right.
to see what they're going to say or do.
That's right. I mean, though there have been exceptions to that. Justice Souter, who left the court last year, was someone who didn't come to the court with a very clear record on every issue. That wound up being good for the country because it turned out that he was actually a pretty strong voice for people.
Was he a federal court judge before?
He had been a federal court judge for maybe 3 months when he was put on the
Selected.
Supreme Court. So he didn't have very much time
Well,
there.
he's already an interesting person because he resigned, seemingly healthy, right?
That's right. I mean, it
It makes you really love him.
by comparison to Justice Stevens, who's also resigning, but of
Yeah.
course, after a much longer
Will be
tenure
the
on
second
Supreme
longest.
Court. I believe
I
the
think-
second or third
yeah,
longest
yeah.
after a couple of
Right.
other justices.
So the president nominates somebody, and then the Senate has its confirmation hearings. The question now is, who is the president going to nominate, right? And they circulate these 3 people that everybody has seen, and we're told there's another list. There's a debate about whether it should be another a federal court judge or the appellate. See, I don't even know the judicial
the
system.
Court of
Let's-
Appeals judges are typically the ones who are considered for,
Right.
for the Supreme Court.
And
that's right.
that's above a federal judge.
That's above a federal district judge, which are the trial judges.
But then there are the people who are hoping that he'll be really bold and bring to the court that every people's attitude or opinions, right?
That's right.
But the political part of it comes in as to what's the reaction going to be to his nominee, right?
That's absolutely right. And is this a time when the president is able to make a bold choice and have that choice treated favorably by the Senate? Or is it a time when maybe the president has to pick someone that's a safer choice, someone who will not embolden the right wing to oppose the nominee, whoever it may be? So there is this range of people under consideration, some of whom have staked out stronger positions that are more favorable, I think, to the rights of Americans than others. It doesn't mean that the ones who haven't staked out those positions wouldn't be great Supreme Court justices, but to choose someone who has a strong position on important issues is a bolder choice by the president.
Well, right now you face a court that is, the majority is conservative,
The majority is certainly conservative.
even without, I mean, there is no middle person. Well, Stevens is considered to be but he wasn't actually the middle person.
No, Stevens was in fact
He's the-
viewed as being
The leader.
on the left within the court, but the court as a whole has become so conservative that the left of the court is really the center, in some sense, of American politics. in
When
some
did
way.
that switch happen?
Well, that switch has. I would say I would place that shift probably about 30 years ago, when people like Justice Douglas left the court.
That was longer, wasn't it? No, I
That
don't
it
know.
was about
Yeah,
maybe a
30.
little over 30
Yeah.
years ago. And people like Justice, since then, more of those real leaders on the progressive side of the court have left. Justice Thurgood Marshall, Justice William Brennan. These are names that are great figures in having established the progress of American law for all of us. And they were replaced, and they were replaced by people whose names don't ring out in that same way, I think. And so we really see a court that's moving often by leaps and bounds to the right, as with the replacement of Justice O'Connor by Justice Alito, and sometimes more gradually when, a moderate judge is replaced by a slightly less moderate judge.
Yeah, Justice Stevens said that ever since, who did I tell you it was? Ever since
Justice Powell.
Powell was left the court or was appointed, I'm not sure which one, every replacement has been to the right of the person they were replacing.
I think that may be a little bit of an exaggeration, but for example,
yeah.
I don't think we know yet whether Justice Sotomayor is
Right.
to the right or left
Right.
of Justice Souter. And it'll be years before we can say that. But I think it is a generalization that's probably pretty fair.
The seniority gave Justice Stevens a role. What was that?
A very important role.
Yeah.
The Chief Justice, Chief Justice Roberts, is of course the leader of the court in some sense. But when the Chief Justice is not in the majority of the 9 voting justices, then Justice Stevens is the senior justice and determines who would write the opinion that represents the opinion of the court. So when the Chief Justice is not together with Justice Stevens on a particular case, which is quite often in the important cases, then Justice Stevens might say to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I'd like you to write the opinion. He might decide to write the opinion himself, or he might assign it to someone else. But that role of assigning the opinion is a very, very big role.
So who's going to get it?
Well, that's not clear right now. I mean, one of the things we hope for in a replacement for Justice Stevens is both someone who can be a real leader on the court and persuade some of the other justices from time to time, and also someone who will just by quiet behind-the-scenes work, even if that he or she is not going to assign opinions, which they probably won't because they'll be the junior most justice, they'll still be able to have an influence on their colleagues.
So it doesn't go automatically to the longest term, the longest tenured justice, that second role.
Yes, it automatically goes to the longest tenured justice, but of course after Justice Stevens is replaced, his replacement will be the junior most justice and would no longer have that
Oh,
role.
you mean on, I don't understand, on the majority side or what?
Well, here's how it works. The Chief Justice, if the Chief
Yeah.
Justice is in the majority, always assigns the opinions.
Yeah.
If the Chief Justice is not in the majority, the next most senior justice does that. And if with Justice Stevens gone,
In the majority,
in the majority, it might be Justice Kennedy, Justice Ginsburg, perhaps, if she is.
Yeah.
But she's so junior that she's unlikely
Yeah.
to be in. I think couldn't be in the
I mean,
majority.
it's not going to be Clarence Thomas.
It's probably not
Could
going to
not
be.
be,
It's
or it
probably,
could be, because.
it could be
But
because
they'll
he
be in
has-
the same. They usually vote in the same way the Chief Justice
That's
does.
right. So it
So
would
it
be
has to be
very
a
rare.
dissenting. I got it.
It'd be very rare.
I see.
And so we see this new situation where we hope that this person will be a voice for persuasion, and a strong, bold voice on the court. When this new justice is assigned opinions to write, we want those opinions to be really strong opinions that can influence generations to come.
So we need a politician.
Well, we need, there are judges from the lower federal courts, from the courts of appeals, who have played that role. One of the 3 names I think that are mentioned a lot now is Judge Diane Wood from the Seventh Circuit. She has played, I think, that kind of role within the Seventh Circuit, a sort of, if you will, political role within the court, persuading and bringing people to her side in particular
What can
cases.
people do to affect the outcome? Is there anything that an ordinary citizen like us can do?
Yes. there are a lot of things. Of course, when someone is named, one can urge one's senator. Here in New York, we have, of course, two senators, Senator Clinton, Senator Gillibrand. Both of them can be urged
Not Clinton.
I'm sorry, Senator Schumer and Senator Gillibrand can be urged to strongly support a good nominee.
Or oppose.
Or oppose. I mean, I'm
Highly
hopeful
unlikely.
that there will
Right.
be someone who should be opposed.
Right.
I don't think there'll be someone who should be opposed. But,
Do they need 60 votes?
well, that remains to be seen.
Oh, if the Republicans say they'll filibuster, they need the 60 votes.
They may need the 60 votes. I think it would be very, very difficult for the Republicans to mount a filibuster. After all, many Republicans, when President Bush was in office, argued that a filibuster was unconstitutional with respect to a judicial nominee. So for them to now turn around and say, we're going to use it against a nominee we don't like, would be very hypocritical. I hope it doesn't happen. We haven't seen that so far. But it would be good to have 60 votes. It would be good to have 70 votes or 80 votes for any nominee. And I think any of the people under consideration that I've heard about would warrant unanimous votes from the Senate. There's no one there who...
Even if
who
you're
isn't-
not thrilled.
Well,
Yeah.
that's right. Even if you're not thrilled, they're all very eminent, qualified people who would contribute to the Supreme Court.
There are other important federal judicial spots.
That's right.
There are a lot of vacancies.
There are a lot of vacancies. There are about, I would say, about 100 vacancies on the lower federal courts. One thing that's been disappointing is that of those 100 vacancies, there are only about 30 nominations. So there are a lot of vacancies where President Obama could make nominations but hasn't done so
Why,
yet.
do you think?
I can't say for sure, but I think that, the first year of President Obama's presidency has been dominated by the economy and healthcare reform, and that has pushed judicial nominations to the back burner. But aside from that, I think...
Is it the Justice Department that handles those things, or is that the executive office?
Both the White House counsel and the Justice Department are involved in vetting nominees and making recommendations to the president, as are senators from particular states. Senators play that role. So the pace has been a little bit slow. There's a new White House counsel, Bob Bauer, who's we think is moving the pace a little faster. But part of the reason for the slow pace has been that Republicans have used every mechanism they can to obstruct the president's nominees to judgeships. People who have been waiting for months and months to receive a vote on the Senate floor. People who have come out of the Judiciary Committee and are just waiting.
Why do they have to wait?
Well, because there are various means that senators can use to slow things down, putting holds on nominations.
And is that an anonymous thing, or do you know who's put the hold on?
Sometimes it's anonymous, and sometimes it's just the implicit threat of a filibuster, or that some other piece of legislation will be slowed down if this judge's nomination is moved forward. So a variety, I think, of techniques has been used to discourage a quicker pace of confirmation.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, it's what happens in a court that's missing in a district that's missing federal judges?
Well, makes more work for those judges. It slows down the pace of justice that can be done in those courts. People wait longer for their day in court when there are fewer judges.
There are no acting federal judges.
No, there's no such thing as an acting federal judge, someone who's temporarily in that situation. It just makes more work, and I think in the long run, of course, it takes away from the work product of judges if they have too much work to do.
Well, I can't think of Dawn's last name.
Oh, Dawn Johnson?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now that was another example. What was her nomination for? It wasn't for White House counsel.
No, it was for the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department, which is the very important office that gives advice to the president and other government agencies about their legal authority or constitutional authority. This was an office that produced the notorious torture memos during the Bush administration that essentially approved the use of very harmful interrogation techniques. It's an office that needed someone like Professor Johnson to run it. But her nomination was stopped by Republicans because for a brief time early in her career, she worked at NARAL.
That's when I knew her, yeah.
And Dawn and I actually went to law school together. And it's a real
terrible.
Tragedy
Yeah.
that she felt compelled to withdraw her nomination after.
And it was over a year, from the very beginning. She was an early appointment.
An early nominee.
Right.
And just was blocked by the Republicans. And, you know, and one can understand that with all the other issues facing the president, there are a limited amount of sort of big fights you can pick, but the Republicans have managed to make every smaller fight an important one, one that they're ready to take on.
How does somebody become considered for, how does somebody come to the point where they're considered for a federal judge? Are they also former judges, state judges, or are they?
There's a variety of routes to that. Federal appeals judges sometimes have been federal trial judges first. Others, for example, right now there are 3 nominees to the Second Circuit, which is the Circuit Court of Appeals that includes New York.
Right.
2 from within New York City.
The Southern District. Right?
In the Southern District, and 1 in Connecticut. And 2 of them are already federal judges, and 1 is a practicing lawyer. So people can come from a variety of backgrounds and the variety of, I think, routes to that kind of nomination.
It also goes through, it's another power a senator has, isn't it, to forward that name?
That's right. Where a senator, typically where a senator is of the same party as the Democrats, so in New York that's true for both senators, the senators have a role both in district court nominations, they have a bigger role, but also for the Court of Appeals, they have a role in making recommendations to the president about who he should consider for appointment. And that role is a very important one. And so we've really had some excellent nominations to the Second Circuit. Judge Denny Chin, who sits in the Southern District here, is actually, we hope, about to get a vote on the Senate floor after, you know, again, a long delay. You know, when you look at the percentage of President Obama's nominees who have been confirmed, it's a lower percentage than, I think, going back 30 or 40 years. And he didn't even nominate that many. I mean, it's a small number of nominees, but the percentage that have been confirmed is very low. And that's in a Senate that has been, you know, had a fair number of, fairly good Democratic majority. It's really a shame that that hasn't happened faster.
Let's go back to the court, the Supreme Court for a minute.
Sure.
We can basically divide it right now, right? There are, how many, there are, I'm trying to think, are there 3 people that we would consider to the left of center?
Well, I mean, let's start with Justice Stevens, certainly yes.
Well,
and Justice Breyer in general.
Right.
Justice Ginsburg and Justice Sotomayor. Justice Breyer sometimes votes a little bit more to the right on business-related cases. And then you have the conservative justices. The Chief Justice, Justice Scalia, Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, and Justice Kennedy. And Justice Kennedy now is really playing a role that Justice O'Connor used to play, because sometimes he will vote with the what I would call the centrists, and sometimes he will vote with the conservatives. And of course, sometimes there are still unanimous opinions that come out of the Supreme Court where there really isn't that kind of disagreement.
So we have 1 African American, 1 Latino, 2 women. We've got 2 Jewish people. We've got how many Roman Catholics? Or not I don't know what Roman Catholic means. Catholic.
6.
6 Catholics. And with Justice Stevens leaving, we have no Protestant.
Yeah.
So in a court that has the aura of being such a WASP establishment, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is. And, you know, it'd be great to see more diversity on the court, more women appointed, more African Americans appointed.
More people of color.
More people of color. You know, Denny Chin, who I mentioned before, is, if he gets confirmed to the Second Circuit, will be the only active Court of Appeals judge in the United States who's Asian American.
Is that amazing?
I mean, it's really amazing. I mean, maybe that's too much to expect for
Yeah.
the Supreme Court, but it's...
There is a candidate for the Supreme Court that is Asian.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are always people, names out there that can do that. And, you know, we can hope that it would be great to just see another woman appointed to the Supreme Court.
Or an African American.
Or or an African American woman.
Right.
You know, there are various possibilities. So
It's so interesting to me, do those religious backgrounds ever come to play?
I don't think they can come to play in a way that anyone can see directly.
Now, we only have a minute, so I forgot to talk about this.
Sure.
The conservatives are always calling the people, progressives or people to the left, activist judges. Now, how can they do that? Are they not as activist, if not more so?
They are every bit as activist, if not more so.
So where do we get this nonsense?
Well, it's rhetoric. It's rhetoric that's designed to influence public opinion.
Scare
but it's
people,
not
right?
really true. You know, the case I described earlier about corporate spending on political activities, this overturned decades and decades of precedent. There was a school desegregation decision a few years back, likewise overturned decades of precedent. Those are examples of activism by conservative judges. All they want to do is achieve the results that the ideology dictates.
And they can be overruled, as we saw in the Ledbetter case, by the Congress doing legislation.
They can when they're interpreting
It's just-
legislation,
yeah, but not otherwise.
Not on the Constitution, unfortunately.
Well, thank you very much. I hope that everybody writes to their senator, pays attention to this, because it's really very important, as you've very clearly illustrated.
Thank you.
Appreciate your coming. Thank you very much,
Pleasure.
Simon Heller. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.